And we have a new family member as of a couple of days ago.
What a new.
What?
Hold on.
What do we got?
Let me see if I can get. Let me see if I can get a picture for you.
Morning, everybody.
Howdy, ma'am.
Hey, Brianne.
Hey. There's Henry and there's MJ. We were stuck out in the audience just now.
Hi, Henry.
We had a radio Henry send someone to the stage left doors to let us in.
Knocking on the stage door.
Hi, Mary Jo.
Hi.
Sorry for the delay. I was able to fix that technical difficulty at the last second. Isn't that always the best feeling when you fix it right before doors open?
Okay. Well, Henry, that's what you're known for. Always
It's like
being the problem fixer.
It's like the equivalent of the in-ears going down right before the artist walks on stage.
Exactly.
Sorry to everyone. We had to push the doors. I'm so sorry.
What are you guys trying to do? Give me anxiety before we start a webinar? What do you mean the ears are down? Come on.
Never.
What are you talking about?
I think we it's like we got everyone. We're streaming on YouTube and we're good. Are we good to roll, Henry?
Yeah, go for show.
Hello everyone, to everyone who's joining us for the first time and to everyone who has been keeping track with us and following along our webinars. Thank you for being here with us today. We've officially made it to webinar number 13, I believe. We've come such a long way since we started this thing, and we couldn't be more thankful for everyone that's here with us. And we've got our wonderful panelists that have been with us through it. And then we are joined by Brandy Lindsay. Again, thank you for being here with us, who is joining us again today for Tour Management Part 2. So let's go ahead and get this thing kicked off. International Part 2. You want to kick it off, Henry, and I'll pass it over.
And let me just make sure my chat says all panelists and attendees so we can all chat together. But this is part 2 of International Touring 101. So if you missed part 1, be sure to catch up on our YouTube page. But the fundamental language of concerts is universal, but every country has its differences in culture, language, and resources that an international tour will need to navigate through. So in part 2, we will go around the world in 60 minutes, covering some of the things that you'll need to think about before takeoff and the protocol you'll face when you land in each country. So our special guest, Brandy Lindsay, the queen of all things immigration, joins us again to make sure we don't screw this up. So let's dive right into today's lesson with our friend over the border, Doug Wilson.
Thank you, Henry. Yeah, I just wanted to start today's episode touching on some cultural and social points, which will inform how we move forward with the rest of our webinar today. Last week, we discussed Europe and North America, and obviously there's some key differences, fairly obvious key differences going from country to country in those places, language and sometimes currency. But for the most part, there is a cultural symbiosis with most Western European and North American countries. And by that, I mean, going across the border from the US to Canada really doesn't feel all that different. Same thing for going from Germany into Austria, Denmark into Sweden, or Spain into Portugal. Things look the same culturally, socially. Their social structures are fairly consistent, and that extends to things like law enforcement and cultural norms. When we approach touring in the rest of the world, things obviously become a little bit different. And if anyone has traveled beyond their own borders, they will know that that is the case. That's all fairly self-explanatory, but to put it in a touring context, touring can often feel like you're traveling and living in a bubble. You are on a tour bus or in a venue or on an airplane or in a Western chain hotel, surrounded by people that speak your same language and have transported your culture and your home country's culture on tour with you. And that can be, you know, you're surrounded by that almost 24/7. But it's important to acknowledge that you're not in your home country, and that you oftentimes when you approach touring in other territories, you're in a country whose social values, rule of law, religious beliefs, cultural beliefs are very different from those of your own. So, you know, we wanted to just kick this off by acknowledging that, and to also state that we work in the arts industry, and we often travel with groups who are very diverse in terms of gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religious or political beliefs. And it's important that when you go into countries that do not necessarily share the same core beliefs as you and maybe people in your group, that you acknowledge that you prepare for it, and that you prepare your team for going into a working scenario that might be alien to how their own core beliefs are, or the way that they live their life is. But ultimately, you're there to do a job and put on a show. So to prepare your team and have the smoothest process when you arrive in that country, you have to prepare for that, and you need to educate yourself on local cultures, ways of doing things, and impart that knowledge to your team before they land. So I'm going to pass over to Adrienne, who's going to take it from there on that topic.
So a couple of things that I wanted to mention, particularly when you're traveling to places like the Middle East, and they are beginning to open up even more and they're giving the illusion of becoming more westernized. And in some places, they in fact are adopting more sort of characteristics of Western culture. But you've got to do a few things to protect yourselves and the folks that you're traveling with. Regarding your cultural differences, just understand that in other parts of the world that are not Western, religion dictates policy and politics. So you really must understand just how strict the cultures are. You've got to watch out for your dress codes. It's important. And the more respectful you are and the more aware you are going into these places, knowing about head coverings, knowing about when your shoulders and your elbows and your knees for women can and what you need to do. And the difference, for example, if you're playing in Abu Dhabi versus Dubai, which is 2 hours apart, it's worlds different. You'll get spit on for having an uncovered head in Abu Dhabi, but in Dubai, it's completely westernized and you'll see women in shorts. So it can be confusing. My suggestion is to go on your State Department websites, go on the cultural websites of the areas that you're going to, find out those cultural rules and regulations, familiarize yourself as the tour manager or the group leader with them, disseminate the information to your other department heads. For example, if you're on a larger tour and you've got a production coordinator, production manager, let production know. If you're the kind of tour where everyone speaks together, send out an email. Give people links to information. I work a lot in pop, and we have dancers, and we've got all ethnicities and gender variations and lifestyle variations. And I'm proud to say that I travel the world with a 6'2" transsexual. And you just have to know who your people are, and you've got to understand that the cultures that you're moving into, and then you do your best to navigate within them. Are we perfect? No. But a bit of prep and a lot of communication will go a long way for you, and it will get you more done on the ground if you know. Also, please use your promoters as a resource. Many of them who welcome foreign artists and their crews already have a bit of information for you. Should you ask for it and have questions, they're going to be a wealth of information. They're also going to be who you call if you've got an issue. Also, regarding security and things like that, we absolutely recommend that you bring security with you on your farm trips when you can. If you can't, for example, when you all get into vehicles, you want to know where your cars are going and who's driving and who's in charge. We have had a situation in a foreign country where one of the vehicles ended up veering off, and they were brought to what appeared to be a gas station, and the vehicle was blocked in, and the folks, the band, were unable to get out, and there was no way for them to get in touch with anybody, and we're not to this day sure why that happened. But these are the kind of weird anomalies. You never know who the driver is. The drivers may not be a professional driver from a car service. They may be somebody's brother-in-law in a minivan, and you don't know that. So you've got to make sure that you are aware of what's happening. In one scenario, and I'm going to share a personal experience to just share how the nuances can affect you. I am a very handsy person. I speak with my hands, and as we do in Western culture, I may reach out and put my hand on your shoulder while how are you, right? So in one situation in Dubai, I was working to clear the area for a closed sound check for my artist. And I was walking around out in the area that would be considered the house. It was at a very large racetrack in the United Arab Emirates, and all the crews that were setting up the very high-end VIP areas, the royals of many nations were expected. This was a big deal. There was a lot of security. There was state security, venue security, Live Nation security. It was a lot. So I was out there just gently asking folks who weren't actually working if they could either close and move along, or just not to stand on the fence and gawk at the stage. And at some point, I absent-mindedly placed my hand on a male person from, I couldn't even tell you where. The next day when I got to work, I was told that I created a little, unknowingly and completely unaware, because nobody reacted to me. I put my hand gently on someone, and that is a huge no-no. You're not even in the same room with unmarried women. If you're the women, the male female thing in the Middle East is not to be played with. I had no idea that I did it. It went from that gentleman to his supervisor to track security to state security to Live Nation back to me. It was a big deal, and I couldn't even remember doing it. For the rest of the trip and any other subsequent trips, I find myself just casually walking with my hands clasped behind my back, because I have a tendency to reach out unknowingly and with no malice. So when I say that you've got to pay attention to culture, you do. Please be aware of what your health standards are when you're going overseas, and if you need to get any particular shots. There may be shots required. For example, in South America, you've got to have a yellow fever shot to get into certain areas in Brazil, and that's not for your safety. It's for the safety of the fragile environment there. They don't want us to carry in a myriad of other bugs and what have you. With that being said, I recommend a Passport Health if you don't have a physician that you go to regularly, or you want to get some great information. This is a company, a medical company that has many, many locations around the US. I use them for travel, some personal extended travel that I was doing through Southeast Asia, and I was going into some very rural areas that had malaria concerns and some other types of things. And with a situation that required, I was fully vaccinated. So I went to these folks, and they were super knowledgeable, in addition to being able to give you all of the vaccinations that you need and to tell you what you'll need to booster them in the timeframes. They also were able to tell me about a lot of resources in terms of, for example, clothing that already had bug spray, insecticide built in to the clothing, and situation like that for severe outdoor stuff. And sometimes we do festivals in places. So I just recommend that you are aware of the things that you need to have, how you protect yourself and your traveling party. Make sure also when you're traveling that you know what your carry-on restrictions are. Don't get caught off guard. The whole world does not lug around everything in the kitchen sink. And a lot of airlines that travel in and out of remote places will charge you by the pound for your carry-ons and have some serious restrictions for what that is. They'll also have different, just be aware. I think that the lesson that you're going to come out of mostly today is to have your awareness up. Understand when you're traveling to some of these remote destinations, the power is different. You may need a VPN, which is a virtual private network, to get into certain websites that you might need for resources or for personal enjoyment. Just make sure you understand when you're traveling that you're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy and company, and that you really have to know where you're going. Be prepared to acquiesce to cultural differences. Be prepared to have your technology sorted, your health concerns sorted. I recommend some tours will buy international travel insurance for you. Some places, and Brandy can maybe hit us on some of those, but I know, for example, Australia isn't going to let you in unless you're carrying your own insurance. If something happens, they are not interested in footing the bill. So sometimes you will have a tour that when industry requires it, they'll get it for you. Other times you're best served to pick it up yourself. You never know, particularly if you're the kind of person that enjoys staying over. If you get to go to these exotic places and perhaps you want to veer off and do a separate thing or stay a little longer, having some insurance for yourself, it's very inexpensive and it can save you a world of trouble. And I think that we're going to be able to post some helpful websites and information for you on the website to back all this up. And I think at the moment we're going to talk about, going to throw it over to Mark, who's going to talk about some of the variable issues that we run into when we're crossing the date line.
All right. So some of the big things, obviously, is time. That's, as a tour manager, that is our biggest friend and foe and all of the above, and how to manage all of that properly is a day-to-day battle that we deal with. Crossing over, in most cases, if you're going from the States and you're going over the Pacific, you're going to be crossing over forward into backwards, which can get a little confusing. Once you have a couple trips over, you'll start getting the reign of it. But just from looking from a Atlantic forward, once you get to Dubai and then start getting over into Asia, Australia, you're looking at around 15 hours ahead. I believe right now it's around 4 a.m. in Australia. So that can get a little tricky when you're planning all of your logistics around going across Pacific and you're going to cross that 24-hour timeline. A lot of cases, you don't really have the time to do like a 2-day ahead. That's usually my go-to. And that'll give you some time to adjust to the jet lag. That's kind of our biggest battle, personally, dealing with jet lag and how to kind of go about that. I always say intermittent naps is mine. I know everyone has their own strategy of how they like to do their jet lag, but I think giving yourself time and giving your team time to adjust to your surroundings is going to be your best bet, but you won't always have that time. So just preparing accordingly to adjust to that. And, just the mental aspects of the United States being asleep when you're in Asia or you're in Australia can be very tough call as well. So those are some things to put in and consider. We always revert back to preparation. If you are going over the Pacific, do know that they are completely a day ahead of you and that you will be landing a day ahead of the United States and they could be asleep. And just, can't revert enough on preparation and to just talk with your promoters, like what Adrian was saying. Like, those people are there for you to help you on every step of the way, and that's time. They're there to be there for you, and you know, and be there when you arrive. I downloaded the World app as soon as I knew I was going to be going international. I have every single country in there, and it's on the front of my phone, and it tells me exactly what time it is everywhere around the world, and it will become your best friend. I'll type it in the chat for you to take a look at after this. And what else? Let me minimize.
You have that
here.
website with the jet lag, how to help yourself.
Oh, yeah, jetlagrooster.com is something I really like if you have the time. It's a very simple website that was designed by a sleep researcher, and you type in your departure city and time, your destination city and time, generally when you go to sleep at night, when you want the sleeping plan to start, all the details, and it just lays it out for you. You know, when you should go to sleep, when you should wake up, when you need to have light, when you should take melatonin, and that has helped me a lot. Sometimes it's a little challenging because you're going from continent to continent, but that's been helpful.
The mental battle is disconnecting, right? So you're leaving from the United States, your brain wants to keep you there, right? So you leave at noon and then you land at noon somewhere else, but it's midnight in the States, and then you're trying to adapt to your current state, and then you were already on a plane for 20, 30 hours to get to where you were. So it can be a bit of a challenge, and there are ways to get around it. And we'll make sure to post resources for you guys. And then obviously, you know, we can keep talking about it as long as you guys want. I'm totally kind of nerding out on time. So on time zone. So I'm gonna pass
Everyone has an opinion on the best way to fight jet lag.
Yeah.
Everyone has
Yes.
an opinion on it.
Yes.
And the truth is that none of it works, and we all
None of it
struggle.
works.
The
That's
truth
why we
is
always
that
try everybody else.
when you land in Asia, you're going to be awake for 48 hours. Like that you just are. You know? So I'm going to talk a little bit about travel, and honestly, international travel is something that we can do a whole session on, and may at some point. But we've decided today to focus a little more on the logistics of visas and the overview of what to expect on the ground in each region. So I'm just going to touch on the general travel and lodging notes that apply in like a blanket sense in these markets. So the way that most deals are structured for territories in Asia, Oceania, South America, the Middle East, and Africa, the promoter will typically pay for and book hotels and the internal travel, including flights and ground transportation.
Mary
So-
Jo, where is Oceania?
Oh, Oceania would be Australia, New Zealand. Does Indonesia count as Oceania, or is that Asia?
I think it's all those islands and
Yeah.
and all
Yeah.
that little thing. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So you're going to want to confirm with management and the booking agent the exact travel informations in the agreements in the deal that the promoter is covering and who's covering what. Like, get that nailed down early. Then you can move forward in your advance with the promoter with a clear understanding of who's doing what. Do not be afraid to talk numbers. Do not be afraid to talk like what the budget cap is, because you're going to have to be working within that. Not always, but most of the time, the tour is responsible for its own international flights in and out of the country, and then everything else the promoter will cover. So you're going to want to work with your primary travel agent on those flights. Entertainment travel agents can help, as we've talked about before in our travel session, can help save a lot of money on international fares, as well as having those relationships with the airlines and being able to make changes for you that you may not know that you can do. For an example of special fares that your travel agent might look at to help you save money are things like regional international fares. So like there's a thing that Star Alliance, which is one of the airline associations has, which is like United and Lufthansa and, you know, a bunch of airlines. It's called a Circle Pacific fare. And the journey has to start and end in the same country. And you have to have a minimum of 3 stops of at least 24 hours in each of Asia, North America, and that's Southwest Pacific. So if you're playing, you know, if you're leaving from Los Angeles and you are playing Australia and then say Singapore, you can hit all those and you can save literally thousands of dollars. So they'll know these things. And so, it's highly recommended that you work with your travel agent. You might want to consider stopovers somewhere rather than a nonstop to save you money, things like that. As far as hotels and flights that the promoter is covering, I like to ask if the promoter is working with their own travel agent. Sometimes they have deals directly with hotels, and they'll book directly, but a lot of times they're working with their own travel agent. And if so, I like to ask to be put in touch directly with them to work on internal flights and hotel. And I keep the promoter on copy for everything, but it's just really helpful to work with them directly. And many times the promoter really appreciates that. Whether the promoter is booking a hotel directly or if it's their travel agent, I always ask to review the hotels they're proposing. And I do some research online to make sure that the hotel is to our standard and to see what area of town it's in, what's around it. You know your group better than anybody. So it's okay to respectfully let them know what some of your priorities are for your group. And don't be afraid to ask if there's an alternative option if you aren't sure if the proposed hotel isn't right for your group. Because they often have other options available that are within the budget price range. Again, you know your group best. They don't. They're just working on what they normally put people in. Your group may not like big chain hotels. Most promoters usually work with reputable hotel chains for international touring groups, but don't assume that. And sometimes you might have a group that wants a little funky boutique hotel in some hipster part of town, not the Hilton in the middle of the city center. And they won't know that,
Don't be afraid to kick it back.
Yeah, don't be afraid to kick it back. You're all working together. It's a partnership. And make sure to communicate with your touring party what any parameters of that hotel. I once was working with an artist and we did 3 days of rehearsal before our first show in Matsumoto, Japan. And there was just not an option for, we were in the nicest hotel in town and there just weren't a lot of options. And I had a guy who was 6'6" and there was not going to be a Western length bed for him. So, but it was okay. We communicated with that. He was prepared. We got a little workaround going there and that was fine, but just make sure you communicate with your team. Now for internal flights, make sure to do your homework on baggage allowances and rules for carry-on on regional airlines. They can be very, very different from North America and Europe if you're based in those places. Ask the person who's booking your internal flights, as well as spending some time yourself researching the airline's websites for that information. So for example, if anybody in your group, this comes up a lot when you're first touring over there, or if you're working as I've done with somebody who's doing an acoustic tour, if you need to need to check a musical instrument, don't assume they can just bring it on as carry-on. I mean, if they need to carry it on, don't just assume you can bring it on as carry-on. There are laws in North America and in some places in Europe that you're just allowed to carry it on. But there's a very high possibility in these territories that you will need to buy a seat for it. And you do not want to get caught out at the gate on a sold out flight. Trust me, I know. I've had to rebook a tech on a different flight with a guitar as a seatmate. So, things like that. You just want to check for nuances and make sure you've got that covered ahead of time. Again, preparation and in partnership with your promoter and your booking agent and your management. But again, we can do a whole session on this, but for today, I would say these are the main points you want to consider when you're doing your travel.
I would love to add also, when doing your research, if you do typically have status in the States, I always search Star Alliance, One World, look for the partner airlines, because your perks go really far over there and you'll get access to things, especially when you're flying 20 plus hours. You're going to be happy about that.
And this is a place too, is we haven't talked a lot about loyalty programs. We've talked a little bit about it when we did the travel session, but this is a place where, these travel alliances, the big ones are like Star Alliance, One World, SkyTeam. It's like, have your primary airline that you always use that number on. You're going to rack up the points, and you get the benefits for those, like extra luggage allowance. And
one little pointer that I want to slide in before we go to Brandy and start talking about visas. Back to the date line and how the date changes connect to your arrival arrangements. ladies and gentlemen, when you're doing your arrival planning, however you communicate, whether you're creating an arrival grid if people are coming in on multiple flights, or whether you're all arriving together, you're communicating, you just want to make sure that in your mind, you're noting the date change, because in your mind, you might be leaving, spending 30 hours on leaving on the 13th, and you think you're arriving on the 14th, but you're arriving on the 16th. Okay, so your departure grids and the dates on your departure grids, if you're using a grid, your departure date and your arrival date, it's going to be all over the place. So do you, and I speak 100% from experience, you know, the brain, the mistakes you make, and you go, oh, holy shizzle, my whole entire party is arriving on a different day. So just, I'm giving you the trip ups here. Be mindful.
And also use 24-hour time. It will alleviate any confusion. Like, it just get you, something that I did years ago is I just switched my computer and my phone to 24-hour time. And now I just know it, you know.
I keep myself well confused by using 24-hour time everywhere but the United States. So I'm always in a state of confusion, and right now I have no idea what time of day it is. So here we are.
Well, and then you come home. And then you come home from Australia, what we're going to talk about, and you're landing on the same day.
Yeah, right. Same time in a lot of cases. If you're coming
have an extended birthday, or you could lose a birthday.
I just want everybody to know that I did Christmas twice once because of flying back from Australia. So that was fun.
Starts getting really intricate when you're doing a show a day ahead and then you fly to the States and do a show the same day. Right. It's another
Jet lag is rough.
We did that, Jim. Yeah. We did that. Okay.
So, Adrian, may I jump in?
Please do. Look for Miss Brandy Lindsay, y'all.
Okay. Hi, everyone. When we're going to get into, we're going to go around the world in 60 minutes, as Mark said. And we're going to start with Australia. And we're going to go into, which doesn't require visas for most nationalities. But what I would like to say is I would like to revert back to the importance of checking the passports and the validity of the passport, what passport you're going to carry, getting scans ahead of time, and also making sure if you can get second passports, etc. I have sent Henry an email of just a consulate schedule breakdown or determination. And what it is when you, this applies for Australia as well, but it also includes consulates. You just always want to allow as much time as possible and ask your promoters what their timing is. So let's start with Australia real quick. Australia, you want to apply 8 weeks out. It is an e-visa, and they would like to have copies of the passport ID scans, the addresses of each person, and the position. And then the promoter will update the information into their electronic system with the government. And it just works out very well. And they'll do it for you. And then once it gets approved, they will send you an e-visa. And as Mary Jo mentioned last week, do a printout, carry the number with you, be prepared. Don't think that it's just going to work off your computer or your iPhone. And the thing that is tricky with Australia is that the approval is based upon the passport, the number that you submit. So if you have 2 passports and you don't need a visa, I could get away with not using the visa that I gave to the promoter. That is wrong. You will not be allowed on the plane. So you have to make sure if you lose your passport with the number that you gave to the promoter, you have to allow a day to let the promoter deal with immigration and they can update the system, but it is contingent upon your passport number. And also you do need to have travel insurance or tour insurance. And usually the business manager will help with that. Or you can do a group insurance and online. We'll give you some of those links. Let's see here. And the most important thing is not to overstay. You never overstay in Australia. You stay one extra day, you are going to have some challenges. You stay a little longer and you are going to have a ban for a certain period of years. It's a fact. Now, the thing also for Australia is that they really frown upon criminal history and they want to know everything about you. So you're going to need to declare your criminal history. One good thing is if you've been to Canada and you have a recent FBI cert or certificate, or your home country federal certificate, it would be really good to just use that document. You don't have to reapply. But if you've had a DUI, you have to declare it. They want to know these things. In addition, the paperwork that comes with criminal history is a document called a statutory declaration. You have to get, it's a summary of the incident and what the outcome was and if you fulfilled your probation or parole. And that gets notarized along with the FBI certificate and copies of the court documents. And the FBI certificate can be valid for up to 12 months. And when you have individuals that have more serious declarations, it gets submitted to the Visa Application Character Consideration Unit, or VACU. And that can take a while. That's if you have like somebody that's had a crazy life ahead of time and before touring, it can get challenging. It can get approved. I've seen them approved, but it does take time. So you have to make sure that you are upfront and honest with what's going on. Computer systems do talk. Jail, if you spend time in jail for over 1 year, it's problematic. That is a hard one. And once it gets approved, then it becomes an electronic approval, which is, as said earlier, you just print that out and carry that with you. It usually has a little bit more detail on what you need to be aware of and in your situation, and you're supposed to keep clean, that type of thing. For tourist entry, this is not for performances. It is an ETA, Electronic Transit Authority. And just like what we talked about with Canada, and this will also apply as a tourist going into New Zealand. But the ETA, you apply online, allow up to 72 hours. If you have criminal history, you will not be, it's not automatic. You will have to deal with the consulate. It will kick you back and tell you that you need to deal with the consulate. So you have to allow some time there. Time is gonna be what we're gonna all talk about, and David Norman will definitely chime in on that one. And one other important thing is shared crew. As the world gets, well, when it returns to being a busy, busy place and everybody's touring, and you've got John on tour in South America, and then he's gonna join another tour in Australia. Well, that's fine. You just have to get the electronic visa. But when John is in Australia on one tour, and then he's gonna join another tour in Australia later, and it's two different promoters, it's not that complicated. You just have to have the second promoter with your tour, not the one that they're originally in Australia for. They typically, the first promoter will write a courtesy letter stating that they have no objection to having this person transfer over into the other tour. It's just a protocol process, but it is required. So that's something to keep in mind. Don't just think that the approval from the first promoter will be acceptable for the second tour. It could either not have enough dates on it, or but most importantly, most importantly, each promoter is considered responsible for each of the individuals that they sponsor. And if something should happen and the person gets hurt, sick, whatever it is, or becomes a problem, promoter one is not going to take responsibility, and promoter two will be a challenge. So, and then the individual will have a challenge as well. So that's just really important when you start dealing with shared crew or shared promoters. Just make sure that all the promoters are in communication and have knowledge of it. And that will apply across the board as we move forward into other countries. In regards to New Zealand, It's a much simpler process. You would just apply for an ETA, even as a worker. Most of the more established promoters, they're accredited promoters with the New Zealand government, and they're in a system called the approved, accredited system. I'm sorry, they're accredited is the key word there. And basically you just get off the plane, you go into the smart gate or the entry into New Zealand, you enter as a tourist, and you just say that you're working with an accredited promoter. That visa is valid for 3 months. And it's a really simple process. That's all I have for you. Again, if you have any criminal history or anything like that, Australia and New Zealand do talk to each other. They're very, very tight. And criminal situations need to be reviewed by New Zealand just as much as it does Australia. So that's what I have. Any questions on Australia, people?
No, that's good. I learned a lot about that, actually. Thanks.
Yeah, the stuff no, it's changed in the 20, 30 years I've been doing this. I know it used to be a much different process used to have passport photos, and it was a whole, even I think as long as 10 years ago, it was a whole process you had to go through for both New Zealand and Australia. So it's simplified a lot since.
Hey guys, can we take a quick question? Brandy, how often do people get refused going into Australia and New Zealand?
Well, it depends on what the situation, reason for the refusal, to be honest. I'll be happy, that's from Carl, I see. I'll be happy to reply to all on that.
Okay.
And
thank you.
Yeah, and the point about the shared crew is really useful, because Australian and New Zealand touring tends to occupy certain times in the year to coincide with the touring festivals that happen down there, like Laneways and Splendor in the Grass. So that might come up quite often, because it's very expensive to get from North America to Australia, and there are only a few cities in Australia, major cities. So, you know, if you've got two bands going around about the same time, it would make a lot of sense for a crew to be jumping back and forth if they work for two bands at the same time.
And one other point that I'd like to say is a lot of people, and I've been to Australia two handfuls of times, and I love it there. And a lot of people want to stay later just as do tourist things. So you can do that. You just need to adjust your status, and the promoter will advise you where to go to take care of that. But you do have to go into the immigration center and do the change of status to enjoy the lovely waters and people and coffee of Australia.
It's very easy. I've done it. It's real easy.
Yeah, it's not that hard. So let's
don't stay on your tourist visa. Okay, moving forward.
Just touring in Australia. Few things are different in Australia compared to touring in the US. One thing, all your internal flights, you're gonna cover your flights to Australia and back from Australia. Generally, you will cover your flights from Australia to New Zealand if you're doing shows in New Zealand and back, sometimes with the promoter, sometimes without. But again, you're always booking stuff with your promoter rep or your tour manager, whoever's this. That's the other thing that's different with Australia, is that you will have a tour manager and a production manager, depending on how big the production is, that will work with you and your production manager on booking hotels, booking internal flights, transportation, all that. We covered a little bit of that earlier in the stuff, but you will be doing that with them. And you know, it's and with their travel agents, but it's always you're always communicating with someone else, because they're kind of running your tour with you and taking care of the local stuff. And it's more of a partnership than you would have in, let's say, in the US. So that goes with the advance. And again, I said, you know, all the flights, you'll be flying between venues. There's not, in very few cases do you do buses. I've done a bus tour there. I would not recommend it. Dolly Parton brings a bus over there. It's legendary, but again, it very seldom happens. Generally, you're gonna fly from city to city. Some days you're gonna fly day of. Generally, you'll have a day off, but in some cases, you're gonna fly day of and go right into show mode and do it. So it's a little different way of touring. You're generally going to end or start in Perth, because that's on the opposite coast. If you look at Australia, it's about the size of the US. So and there's really nothing between one coast to Perth. So you're basically you have to get your gear if you're carrying any production there. You're going to have to truck it, and to truck it is going to take at least 2 days to get from one to the other. So you're going to have a couple days generally in Perth, and that's why you're going to end or start there, so that you can allow for your gear to get where it needs to get, whether it's going to one coast or the other. So that is something to be aware of. Same thing goes with your freight, which again is trucking. You will generally you will be having to get your freight from the U.S. to Australia. Your backline or whatever you're carrying. Generally, if you're carrying a big production, there's companies in Australia, like we discussed with Europe. There's companies that will cover that, or sister companies that will cover your sound, lights, video, etc. Sometimes you'll rent backline, as we discussed, but generally, if you're bringing anything over, it's going to be freight. Your company generally handles the external freight, and then once it gets in, a lot of times the promoter will deal with the internal trucking. But again, it's about communication. You'll have your vendors communicating with their vendors, or their vendors are associated with other vendors, and the key to it all is communication and knowing where you're going, what you're doing, who you're dealing with in all these cases. Anything else that I'm missing? Our hotels, I guess, is another thing we're doing. I know Mary Jo had discussed that earlier. Your promoter will be dealing, with the flights and with the hotels. You'll be having booking the hotels. Again, it takes communication, whether you're doing it with the promoters booking it or their travel agent is booking it. It's all about communication, getting them, the rooming lists, what your expectations are for what kind of hotels. If your band is going to be in one hotel versus your crew being in a cheaper hotel, all that communication
and make friends with your Australian tour manager.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's a partnership. Like I said earlier, it's a partnership, and you want to have that good relationship with them, because the success of your tour will be on that relationship. You can have a great experience, and you can have sometimes it's like the tour manager's vacation going into Japan or going into Australia, because
it is.
You don't have to do a lot. If you have a great tour manager, you're just like making sure they're doing their job and making sure that everything is covered, and you're double checking their work. But it's an easy gig. But if you have one that you don't get along with and you don't trust, it can be twice as much work, because you're having to redouble everything that you're doing. So it's important to really have great communication and a good rapport with that person. It's great when you've done it many times and you got the same people all the time. You already have that relationship, whether it's same tour or not, and who you're coming over there to deal with, whether it be promoters or tour managers or production managers. And it's great when you do that, because you walk into it, they know you, they know what you expect, and it can be a vacation, just pretty easy, because you're all the logistics and all the stuff is kind of taken care of by them. You just follow their lead in a lot of cases and make sure that you're covered on everything. Anything else I'm missing, guys?
There's a great question from Matt Palmieri, and he's asking, is the cost of hiring a local TM or PM a tour expense or promoter expense? And that is a promoter expense. It's just something they provide to make everybody's life easier, really.
Yeah.
So
as our hotels and as our internal flights too. It's also a promoter. I mean, obviously we're paying for it, but it is a promoter expense. We only deal with external, and everything in Australia is pretty much covered by the promoter. And obviously, we have to be making enough money selling tickets and all that stuff, but it's taken care of internally.
Where are we going next?
You want to give that, thanks for that, because Australia can be pricey.
Yeah.
In most situations, the agent and the promoter understand the realities of what we're going to have to go through to get over to these countries. Like whether it is landing a couple days early, getting those extra hotels for your crew to arrive in time, to do your builds and whatever you need to do for a smooth show day. And then internally as well, what your needs are on the ground. There is more leniency and flexibility that go into those talks preparing for us to get over there.
And you may be paying for that. If you're going in 2 days early, the promoter's going we only got enough in the budget to go over 1 day early. So you may be paying for that extra day. And that's all important stuff to know ahead of time as to what's covered. And again, that's also what's really important about having your dates right, because it's really easy to go like, oh, they gave us 2 days, and you realize actually that's not 2 days because I just lost a day going over there, and it's so it's really important to keep that straight and know your times and have that all sorted ahead of time and know how many days you're going to be there and all that, and what you need for jet lag and all that stuff, and make sure the promoter understands what you need for hotels coming in is really important, because I think we've all been in situations where we're like Adrian said, where we're like, oh shit, that everybody's coming in this day, and that's not what they were really coming in.
You know what? I want to clarify actually, because I think we got maybe the verbiage is a little bit confusing, because some people are saying promoter cost or saying it's a show cost. I think what we actually meant is it's a show cost. Sometimes it's a promoter cost to put the local T in, but yes, all of the internal flights, hotels, tour manager, those are show costs, but it's as opposed to coming out of pocket for the tour. So actually, thanks for calling us out on that, because it is, and sometimes actually it is I have seen it where it's a promoter cost to have the local tour manager, because he works for them, he's on salary, but most often, it's a show cost.
The same sort of applies to all the countries that we're about to hit. So just blanket statement, a lot of that applies to the next couple of countries. So we don't have to beat a dead horse. We move into one of my favorite places. 5-1, take us to Japan.
My favorite
too.
Well, I have found, and many of you, like you just said, that Japan is one of my favorite places also. I've also found that they are the most organized country as far as putting things together. And they're very, very, if you're very much the anal A type, this is the country for you, because they have it down to a system. I remember the first time that I traveled over to Japan, we had set up all of our gear, and there were 5 guys that were on stage. This was long ago, Polaroid cameras. Many of you probably don't even know what those are. They were taking Polaroid pictures of everything, the front and back of our rigs, the front of house console, everything. And I said, what are they doing? And the Japanese tour manager who was traveling with us said, you'll see tomorrow. So the next day we played in a different city. When we rolled in with our crew, everything was set up. They had this big easel set up with all the Polaroid pictures. And they had 2 guys whose whole job was to radio to everyone on stage, okay, you're 4 inches off from where it was yesterday. I mean, they had everything set up exactly as it was the previous day. So I digress. So Japan, touring there is going to be very much like Australia. You're going to have a tour manager who's most likely going to travel with you, who's also going to be your translator. And I think it would behoove you to at least learn a few words in Japanese, like good morning, good afternoon, good evening, just small things to show that you've made an effort to learn their culture. Their culture is very, very different than any other country, not only because of the language barrier, but because of their relationship with China, the relationship with the United States. You're most likely going to be always traveling on bullet train from city to city if you're not flying. And bullet trains, I think that many of you here will attest that that is one of the coolest things to travel on. And like Australia, you're going to be traveling most likely day of show, either via flight or bullet train right into a show. So one of the other things about Japan is when you're landing, they are very, very big on having a production meeting as soon as you get to the hotel. And they will usually involve like a small dinner or lunch, depending on what time that you're arriving, but they will double check, triple check, quadruple check everything that you've done in the advance, and be prepared to drink. I personally don't drink, but be ready for that. And another big thing in Japan is dealing with gifts. They are very, very high on giving gifts. Don't think that you have to give a gift. From their standpoint is that they're showing respect for you as a touring person and you honoring their country from coming over and touring. There are 4 major airports that are in Japan that you're going to be traveling in and out of. There are two in Tokyo, which are Narita and Haneda. There's Kansai in Osaka, and I think I'm pronouncing this right, Shubu in Nagoya. So those are the four major international airports you're going to be traveling in and out of in Japan. Let's see, have I missed anything, guys?
No, that's good to know about the airports because, you know, Narita's a long drive in. That's almost a 3-hour drive usually into the city, depending on where you're staying. So, but no.
The promoters usually, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Promoters usually would like for you to fly into Narita because it's the major international one there. But for ease of operation, it's always better to fly in and out of Haneda because it's a little bit less busier. It's kind of like our O'Hare and our Midway. O'Hare is usually a lot busier and a lot crazier, but Midway is a little bit quieter, but with less flights. So
yeah,
you may find yourself flying into Narita from overseas, and then if you're flying to Osaka, you might go out of Haneda. We've done that.
Oh, Nick Gold says Delta has moved all flights to Haneda. That's great. Yeah, so do your research. If you get lucky and one of those flights works in your favor, then take it. Because
we actually were headed to Nick Gold's point, we were headed to Vietnam for the first week in March. Obviously that didn't happen, but we were routing a lot of the connections because already there were issues with routing through China. So we were routing either through Seoul or Haneda. There were quite a few Delta connections.
And
from the West Coast specifically.
One last thing I'd like to add is Japan is very, very strict on their time. So the bullet trains run on time, shows usually start on time, and curfews usually end right on time because of their train system there. So at a certain time at night, all of the trains stop. So be very, very cognizant. If you have an artist that goes on late and is tardy all the time, just be really cognizant of that and say, hey, this is a whole different animal here in Japan. Everything runs on time and ends on time.
And they're probably, to that point, the single most respectful and polite culture that you will ever travel through. In addition to being so efficient, they are so pleasant and so polite, and their culture is so perfect. And we are so different from them just in our affect. So again, advice culturally, be mindful of how great they are. They want to do everything they can. And when you're being difficult and pushing, and I have been to Japan with one of the most difficult artists on the planet, when you're pushing, all they're gonna do is say yes. They are not going to push back hard at you. They're gonna say yes, and then they're gonna politely bow and back away and leave you in your own pile. So they're not gonna fight with you or become aggressive. They are gonna shut it down and move along, you know, and they're gonna do the best they can. So be gentle with, you know, be nice to these people because they really, really go the extra mile to make sure. And they're not always on point. So for the moments where you find that they may have not gotten exactly what your needs are square, just go to them and say, thank you so much for the effort that you put in, but perhaps could we make an adjustment? Treat them nicely.
And there is no technical word for no in Japanese. The term that you'll hear a lot for them not saying no is, I think so, maybe. It's not saying yes, and it's not saying no. So you'll hear that term a lot. I think so, maybe.
Yeah, true. Okay, so we're gonna throw to Brandy for some visa conversations.
Yay, Japan. Okay.
Hey, we love Japan.
We love Japan.
Okay, now is my opportunity to talk about this spreadsheet or the PDF that I put together. Henry, would you be able to post that?
Yeah, it's on the website, and I
Thanks,
can share it for you as
well. So while he's doing that, the important thing when you're traveling internationally, and visas really start to play a role in your travel and logistics prior to traveling, or if you have to pick up visas in another country, well, because there's not enough time at home, you always want to start with, when am I leaving, or you want to, before I'm leaving on this day, you have to think about what the promoter time period, not that one, the other one, that's China.
Oh, sorry.
So I have 5 phases that will come up, and one is you start with the tour manager and the visa agency coordination. And there are just some considerations. I just kind of banged this out this morning. But you want to, as I talked to you last week or mentioned last week, thank you, Henry, that's it. Phase 1 is, it varies per country, but basically tour manager and the visa agency coordinator, you have to figure out who's in your tour party, what passport you're going to use, scan that passport, make sure it has validity for more than 6 months after your last day of stay. And that, if you're doing multiple countries, you want to look at the last country and make sure that you're going to use the same passport, or be prepared for figuring out how to organize the passport that you're going to use. Then you have blank pages. That's really important. If you have 4 countries you're going to and 3 need visas, you want to have at least 4, if not 5 blank pages. And then you also want to know if you have facing pages, which we talked about last week. You want to verify the nationalities, because not all nationalities might, or some might not require a visa. Others definitely will require special processing. And then you have to do the proof of legal status. If they're here on a US, I'm speaking if you're applying in the States, a USO or P visa, a work visa. Tourist visas are a whole nother conversation. Usually they have to apply in person for that because they're not really working. You have to be working. So all of this is in the phase 1. You organize all that. And then I guess the part that gets hard at this phase is, has the tour management and production management decided what they're going to use for their show? Who are they going to use? And that could get into, well, as I mentioned in Australia, Jim is in South America, yet we're going to Australia. So wait, can Jim come to, how does logistics work? So there's a whole bunch of finagling on logistics. Once you have all that sorted, then you want to talk to the promoter, and we then send the information on to the promoter. You want to try to pad the time that you're there by 5 to 10 days. You don't want to have it be on the day you're leaving. Something could happen, or you could fly in a day earlier. You always want to make sure at least 5 days, but at least 2. I mean, just something. And then how long does it take to obtain the approval from the promoter? If you're dealing with my office, we'll tell you, but nonetheless, it's good to have that conversation with the promoter. And then it gets into what country you're applying at, and what's the promoter's going to want to know where to send the approval. That's always a tricky one. Some countries in Japan, you could just take your approval notice or certificate of eligibility card, and that will be sufficient. But if you're going to other countries, they need to send notification direct to that consulate. And if you don't apply at that consulate, then it could hold up the process one more time. And then you're going to pay for expedite fees. And it's a long drawn out conversation and time. And so then you plan on that. Third phase is the agency. What we do, we deal with while the promoter is dealing with their side, we would be preparing the visa applications. Please do not be misguided by the promoter saying that, oh, we have the approval. The certificate of eligibility for Japan is the approval, but it is not the visa. You must fill out the application and provide the information that is needed to complete the package to the consulate. So we prepare all the additional consulate paperwork. We figure out what the consulate fees are. Some require cash, some require online payment, some require money orders, cashier's checks. It's a big hustle. And then a lot of times nowadays, because all the consulates are so impacted, you absolutely want to set an appointment. Some can be a walk-in and they have their specific times, but calling ahead is always good. And if you're traveling with a really big band, we're not talking about that for this round, but if you have a big band, advise ahead of time. And then if there's, Jim is in that other country, but the rest of the group can get the visas here in the States, then lo and behold, that Jim is going to have to apply for his visa somewhere else. So then it gets into logistical coordination. We send those applications out. They want original wedding signature. Something very important to keep in mind is that for Japan specifically, I've seen them question signatures. They want to see the passport signature that you did 9 years ago be the exact same signature that you have on your application, and they will question that. They will actually have you, if they do, they will have you fill out another form, etc. And that is really the trick. So then you return that back to our office, and then we submit to the consulate. We've already made the appointment, and then we know what the process time is. Not all consulates have expedite times. I'm going to talk about Japan in a second, or I am, but I'm just filling it in. As we said, this kind of sprinkles into all countries, but Japan really doesn't process fast. They have their, as David said, they're very L7, shall I say, and just do what they need to do. And it's this time period, and the expedites are an exception, not a given. And then does the submittal date count as day one, or is it the next day? That's always a good question. It can be really tricky at times, and it can really mess you up if you don't know that. And then how do you pick up the passports? Do they FedEx? Do they use the Postal Service, DHL, or can it be picked up? And sometimes people do have to apply in person, and then you submit. So that takes care of that. Then depending on the timeline, this is where it can get tricky, is how to return the passports. Do you FedEx it? Do you overnight it? Do you FedEx same day the passports to them? Do you have somebody? I've flown with passports to meet people at the airport. I actually went to Hong Kong to return passports from a country for a DJ, and I love Hong Kong. It was wonderful, but they had their second passports, and lo and behold, there wasn't enough time because that country took forever. It wasn't the band's fault, but it was a DJ, so things move fast. And it gets into logistical coordination, and then you can get on the plane. So that's my quick thing. These are very quick comments, but hopefully that will be helpful to everybody.
All wonderful things. And as we start diving a little bit more into Asia, I would like to see if we can bring up the document you brought up first, Henry, discussing what an visa is.
Well, may I just add 2 points on Japan very quickly? I know we're running out, so I'm speaking fast. On Japan, it's really important to know that this consulate is highly jurisdictional, and that applies to a lot of consulates. So that means where the person lives is where you need to apply. And then the other points are that Japan is very strict about criminal incidents. So high profile artists are definitely going to be an issue. You need to let your promoter know that, and they can deal with it. And know whatever you submit to the immigration service, no side gigs, none. That's the itinerary, that's it, nothing unless it's pre-approved. You could get yourself and the promoter in a lot of trouble. And second promoters is just like what I said earlier, just make sure everybody's in sync. Okay.
Do you want to move right into China and start talking about the Asian, China, South Korea, Thailand, Hong Kong, get it right into that visa situation?
Was that okay? I mean, we're just, this stuff kind of overlaps, so we.
Yeah, we're moving through organizationally. We're good.
Okay.
We're diving in.
We're keeping it moving.
So this document, this was one situation that came up. I'm fortunate that I wasn't there with my client at the time, but in China, a lot of people were being advised by promoters to go with the M visa. It was able, but also you need to understand is that Live Nation and or just any promoters in general are doing their due diligence to open these doors to us currently. So there is this kind of tense political landscape of trying to kind of navigate giving music to not only that country, but all Asian countries have their own political situations going on where these music promoters are working hard to give that door and open those outlets. So can't express enough how we need to have our immigration ducks in a row once you start going into Asia, because I'm trying to use the right example. Like there was a festival that happened last year, and Chinese officials literally just walked on stage and arrested artists and literally just brought people to jail and just had no regard to anything going on site. So those are realities that are still being navigated. So you have to be very much on your P's and Q's and be really on top of your immigration when starting to go to Asia. But the big point around that was the M visa and Z visa. They would find out that the artists were given M visas, which should be going to crew and people that were all following the artists, and the artist now won't go over there without a Z visa. So that was kind of where I was going with that, and how this document kind of comes into play around that.
Well, one thing I'd like to point out is, if you look at the second bullet at the Z visa, it says the approval process takes between 4 to 6 weeks. It takes a while. You have to get translations of your lyrics. There is a full process ahead of this, but for immigration purposes, and they need that in order to approve things, but for immigration purposes, it takes a long time, and that's where the hassle is. And sometimes you don't have all your people together, but do not go in on the M visa. You're risking it. The police, I mean.
Randy, remember the ones you did for me a couple years ago with the government? It was a car dealership. We did it in I think we did it in 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
So with the government's involved, it's a whole other factor, and they'll like, push it through and do it. So there are all those miracles that do happen in China.
Well, the thing about China is it just takes a while, and the Chinese consulate per the government can change. It's inconsistent. It can change at the next day. So one day you don't need to submit your original green card, next day you do. One day you need this form, the next day you do. But the approval notice, the most important thing is that the new approval notices have a UPC code or a scan code on the bottom, and that's really important. Some consulates require original approvals, so you have to count on FedEx transit time, as well as some can take copies, and it's just, there's a lot there. It's really, really tricky, and China is definitely it's a burgeoning market. It's like quick promoters, so they're just gonna say, come in on the tourists, but it's your call, but it could be a problem in the future because they are known to come and just check and see these things.
You have to be prepared. Sorry about that, Brandy.
That's fine.
I was just emphasizing that you have to be prepared for the landscape. There is a lot of things going on trying to open this market up to further our touring capabilities in these countries right now. And there is this ever going tug of war of what's allowed and what's not allowed. So you could see within a month, like, oh, I just went to Thailand and things were great. And then something happens when you're back and you can't go there anymore. Like there is this kind of tug of war going on between promoters and trying to kind of open those doors. So just be prepared.
Are there any tips or tricks or nuances that we have to deal with on the ground in Asia that you want to point out?
I think the biggest thing is just a lot of things that we've already touched on is just doing your research. You do have to be very thick-skinned. Like the ways that people interact with one another are completely different. How you communicate in the States and how you communicate with these countries are night and day. The etiquettes around communication. We are fortunate that we do get a translator in most cases that will be a promoter rep or someone that's assigned to us, and they'll move with us. They'll book their entire schedule out and mimic our movements and be there for our day in and day out.
Especially in that side of the world. I tend to ask for actually a couple translators if we can afford to, because I usually, if the crew is going to the venue ahead of time to set up, they need their own translator while I'm at the hotel, and I have one with us and the artist, and even if any departments need them, sometimes I find myself doubling or tripling up on translators. It's something that the promoter should easily be able to provide for you. But let's move on. So we're heading to South America, Central and South America. This is another one of my favorites. I've spent a lot of time down there. Brandy, real quick, anything it's such a vague question, but anything on visas you want to cover when it comes to that side of the world?
Yeah, the three big countries are Brazil. That's a good one. They just changed the rules in June of 2018. And basically Americans, Canadians, Japanese, one other nationality don't need visas, which is amazing because that country was a tough one for consular filing. But sometimes the promoters will want to get a power of attorney, and that has to be notarized and apostilled. So make sure to ask your promoter if they need that or not. Some do, some don't. But that is Brazil. And then the original goes down there by FedEx. Argentina, visas are still needed unless you're doing Lollapalooza, which is a cultural event, and that's new as of last year. But visas are needed. They're impacted. It's South America is so busy. You definitely want to set appointment times and recognize that it could take 2 weeks to get the visas issued in the passport. The approval time is about 2.5 weeks, and or maybe a week, I'm sorry, 1 to 2 weeks. And then you also want to make sure that you let them know what consulate you're going to. Important.
Right.
And then third is Peru. That's another hot country. That one takes up to 90 days, 3 months to get the approval.
Wow.
And,
Wow.
you don't want to, you want to have all your names in order. It's tough, and it's really a plan. You have to set that plan out there. And then Chile is another one, and that's a port of entry. Just send the immigration details to the promoter, the manifest, and they're very friendly. Uruguay is port of entry. And then was there one? Oh, Colombia is an e-visa the promoter usually takes care of. So that's that. But you have to allow time for South America, because when everybody goes to South America, everybody needs visas for Argentina and Peru.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'm going to jump into the little nuances of touring in Central and South America. So, I mean, beyond all the other points that everyone's saying about having your ducks in a row, the thing I wanted to point out down here, it's one of my favorite places in the world to tour, but so it's hard to make a blanket statement about it all, but I'd be wrong not to tell you to be hyper aware of the risks and the security of touring down there. There's a lot of bad stories about kidnappings and muggings and just weird things that happen down there. So security.
Use a buddy system when you go out of the hotel.
Yeah, like, I mean, I do recommend to my tour, like, of course, I advise everybody to go with a friend and sometimes, like, maybe just don't even leave the hotel tonight. Just stay in. But you know, I recommend early on when you're planning a tour down there, work in at least one security person into your budget. You know, so at least you have someone on the ground with you that's looking out for your tour's safety and best interest. Get somebody that's experienced, that's been there before, and that can that you trust to wear both hats, to handle venue security as well as the personal detail that your artist is likely going to need as soon as you step out of the airport, and then every time they step out of the hotel. So make sure your security director has the support of local security teams so they can advance their own checklist of things like arrivals, passes, fans, photo barricade, you know, on stage, all of it. Like, just make sure you have your ducks in a row there. I mean, I hate putting a cost on safety, but if you have a tight budget, then you can consider hiring a local security person to cover your team, and you could save on a flight. But you know, if you're going to do that, don't be cheap. Spend the money on a hotel room to have them stay in the same hotel as you are. You know, I do things like make sure that we're staying on the same floor. Everyone is staying near each other. Put everybody under aliases. And if you go this route of going local, see if you can't have your agent get the extra hotel room covered in your deal. Just ask, maybe you can. You know, it's it's a dangerous world out there. So, but always remember, you are the friendly face of your team. So always be friendly and courteous as you take your team international, but keep your head on a swivel and, you know, learn all you can about how security move artists around so you can think like them and can anticipate their needs ahead of time. But another blanket statement for South America is try all the food you can. It's amazing. Yeah, so that's my tips.
Yeah, I think that's just to jump off from what you were saying there. Security is important everywhere, but as an international touring artist from a first world country, in a country where maybe the economy is people don't earn the same amount of money they do here, you're going to stand out 10 times more, 50 times more, 100 times more, and people can get information from anywhere. They will be able to find out where your hotel is if they want to. They might be able to trace your movements. So it becomes absolutely crucial in these markets because you're going to stand out even more so than you do in your home markets. So just to,
And I'm just going to add another nuance. If you can hire, I absolutely agree with bringing your own security with you. If you can hire a local security as an add-on, we do that all the time.
Oh yeah, you know what? I mean, we were keeping this 101. We were keeping this 101, but of course, if you have the budget and on bigger tours, I mean, we're hiring. I'm bringing usually now to South America for a full tour, 3 to 4 security guards from the US that are experienced and work with our team, and then I'm matching the same number I'm bringing or the same number I have down there. So I tend to have, a team of 8 security guards, and then it gets crazy. And when we're putting them into armored vehicles and everyone's armored and carrying guns. I mean, it can be a very serious situation. I mean, I hate to say that it kind of gets, as a tour manager, it's fun to set all this stuff up, but it's really scary considering the situations that you're planning ahead for. So you need to be very careful and make sure you do it correctly. It happens everywhere. I just wanted to point it out that in South America, we tend to ramp things up just a little.
And South American fans are some of the most amazing in the world in terms of their passion and commitment to their music. There is nothing like overjoyed fans in South America. It is something about them that is unbelievable. However, all that joy can show up at your airport arrivals. So just... we just things you've got to know going in. You're going into a third world country. Those kids show up at the airport. It's not safe.
Yeah,
things get crazy.
And I think hiring somebody local is not out of the question for 101. Your first time. I mean, my first time down there, we were able to get somebody
a lot of times
local. It's not out of the question.
will offer or just provide you with security with somebody locally, just so you have. And I always recommend, at least have somebody locally around that knows the area better than your guys do and all that. So I recommend having that. Having that for sure.
6,
so
3, 1, 2,
yeah.
5, 5, 8.
I would like to add to that just no matter what status you're with or how big or small your client is, that you could be going to these continents or these countries for the first time ever. Fans are crazy for artists in most cases coming from the States. I've seen mobs at the airport and they're holding flags and it is a full arrival.
This is not necessarily for an arena level act that Mark's talking about. I mean, this can be for
it's
first time in the country indie band.
Yeah,
They could not be more static for us to be coming to their country for the first time, and it is a full thing. So please do your research and talk with the promoters on how the fans are, and just have that conversation because it is a thing.
Let's rock on to Africa, y'all. Brandy,
All the other places.
Middle East,
okay, Africa.
and go.
Africa. South Africa have 2 blank pages facing each other. It's the promoter will take care of you when you need to get a visa for South Africa. It can't, for either nationality purposes or some other visiting work visa scenario. It can take a while, so be prepared for that. The consulate is interesting, and but when you go into Africa, a lot of the countries, if you're going down there, like into Kenya or Nigeria, most of those consulates, Kenya actually has an e-visa for tourist reasons, so that's always friendly. But if you're going to be working down there, usually you want to see if you can get, if the government is involved, because they can help you expedite the process for processing upon arrival, that type of thing. It makes a difference. Applying for a visa in Nigeria is quite a process. It's done out of DC. It's the only location. You just plan, be prepared to have an expense for that, and be prepared for time.
Middle East.
Middle East, a lot of things changing. The UAE is changing. I haven't read, they've just done some new stuff on business visas. It takes time. If you get a visa, that consulate is really strict on non-budging on anything that's not right. So you have to make sure you have it right. It does take some time to get it together. It takes about a week, let's say 10 days. Israel, make sure to get a stamp in the card, not in your passport. No, no, no. If you get a stamp in your passport, just be safe and get a second passport. It's that serious. And
can you give it, because we're jamming for time, but can you give
I
a
know.
2-minute explanation about why someone would need to do that regarding Israel real quick?
well, it's just all about the country relations. I mean, Israel and Palestine. I mean, if you wanted to go to Palestine, you can't have a stamp in your passport to go to Israel. You can't have an Israeli stamp. There's just no way.
Just a note, a side note on all this is that there are some country to country sensitivities. We don't
fair.
have time to go through all of those here, but know that they exist. Know that I had a Serbian security guy for Europe that I could not take into various places. UK didn't want to see my Serbian friend. Okay, so there is country to country sensitivity. Be sure you just identify any of your traveling party who are not the same nationality as yourself or your artist. Like, for example, if you're a US act and everyone is from the US, but you've got a couple of Europeans or strange other countrymen as part of your crew, as we frequently do, other passport holders, just be upfront and check on it. And if you can't figure it out, call Brandy's office. Go, Henry.
Israelis cannot technically get into Malaysia or Singapore, so, Malaysia that is. So it's hard.
Right.
It's just relationships. Go ahead, Jim. Sorry.
No, I was just saying, just know where you're going and do your research going into it, and you check with your agent, know about all the nuances of visas and what countries are accepted and not accepted and all that. It's all about just doing your homework on where you're going and knowing where you're headed.
Your agent and the promoter are your best friend in navigating this and preparing accordingly. The promoter's going to have all the ground information, your agent and your visa agent as well. Just kind of working between all three are going to help guide you in as safe as possible.
And Robert Groby just said for Israel, it also goes the other way around with the stamp or visa from Saudi. You can't go into Israel. So it's
right. It speaks to country to country.
Thank you for that mention.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
The on the ground nuances about what, honestly, I've always had a great time anytime I'm going to Dubai or Africa. We're covering quite a big region there, but shows in Johannesburg have always been amazing. I'd say the thing that I've had to look out there the most for is just resources, substituting parts of the production for what they have available down there is something that you're going to need to look at. Which, it's really funny. A lot of the old gear from like the 80s and 90s ended up down there. So it's like, hey, that's not so bad. It's pretty old, but it'll still do the job, that, and then takes, okay, when you're going, I don't know, Dubai, UAE, it's sometimes a slower process to advance, but they're really coming up and they're getting their shit together. So I'd say it's the production stuff, the elements that you'll have over there available to you. If you're not shipping your show in, you may need to pivot and adjust your production. And so that's just communication from the production level besides all the usual stuff like power, you know.
Also, in these areas, be prepared to do a little bit of additional admin for security clearances. Generally, if you're coming into these regions, you're probably doing some sort of a public gathering. You may be doing a private. So you will likely, not only will you have to do your immigration business, but there will likely be some promoter related heavy lifting for security clearances, particularly because a lot of the public gatherings and festivals and things that you might be doing as you head down there are state run, because that's what happens. You're going to have some security clearances to go through, and that's your entire traveling party. That also means if we're taking the kids, and again, I said this last week, I'm going to say it again. If you have minors in your party, if you are traveling with children, children of your artist, children of your B party, crew people that are bringing their families over, you've got to be able to, that child needs a passport. And if you are traveling without one parent, regardless of whether or not the family, the parent traveling has a custody, doesn't matter. You are going to need a letter that's notarized by the non-traveling parent that allows you to travel across international borders with a minor. Just know it.
But it's not just that. Sometimes some countries require an apostille, which is an international notary.
Correct.
And one big thing that I'd like to point out is once you clear immigration and customs, do not let your promoter hold on to everyone's passports. Do not. Make sure you reclaim everyone's passports and you have them on you. And each person has them on their own particular person when they're traveling. Because there are some countries, I'm not going to say which ones, will want to take your passport of everyone, almost kind of holding you ransom. So do not let a promoter or anyone hold on to your passports the duration of your tour.
And also,
or a hotel. There are some countries that want that, and you do not have to let them. I have insisted on holding them before.
Here's something important that you need to know going into these regions specifically. For those of us who are bringing our road cases, the drug laws there are very strict. And I'm not talking about your recreational drugs at this moment. Sudafed is illegal. Certain cold medications are illegal.
Wow.
You've got to get online, have a full understanding of what those drugs are. In certain cases, if you have some allergy medications that you have to take, they're illegal over there, even if they're over the counter. So what you need to do is get your doctor to print you out a new prescription and a letter that says it's medically necessary, and alert your promoter in advance. There are some protocols to take. Just listen. If you're bringing a road case over there that's got 900 pounds of last year's medications in it, this is the time to go through your production case and take out anything that could be rogue, that you could unknowingly, accidentally be transporting an illegal drug over an international border into a place that's got zero tolerance.
Yeah.
Again, this goes back to our conversation in the beginning about those things. And we're going to state the obvious. Kids, don't bring your drugs on international touring with you. You shouldn't be doing them anyway. Don't do drugs. Don't bring them in your backpack. Don't accidentally leave last week's half of a doobie in your pants pocket.
Don't bring edibles. Edibles count.
Don't bring edibles.
And Olga just mentioned CBD oil is tricky in a lot of places. Just don't bring it.
Don't bring it.
Not worth
Don't
it.
put it in the road case. Figure yourself out. This is a serious conversation. Blue Johnston mentioned it earlier. Again, this should be self-evident, but they will catch you in tricky ways that you didn't see coming. So please be thorough about learning where you're going. Henry, you look like you want to say a thing.
Oh, well, you know what, Robert made a good point, you know, and which is why we opened the show with this today, to keep in mind of the local culture and religious customs in the Middle East or anywhere, dress code, behavior, male, female acceptance, praying times, alcohol and drug laws. That's a really important point. And it, you know, Thank you, Robert, because that's something that you see a lot more of in the Middle East and through Africa. So you have to be mindful of it. And so we felt the same, and we started the show with that. So that's a great way to sort of end our trip around the world, is to respect the cultures you're going into. And let's take it to the fun part of this segment that MJ is going to call, we're calling Doing the Thing.
Doing the thing.
Just before we jump into that, I just wanted to make one super quick point on communication. I have had the incredibly difficult task of having to try and work a show day in my second language. It's really, really difficult. A lot of our job is about detail and nuance. So just be aware when you're talking to people, you will face to face with an English speaking person wherever you go in the touring world. But just be aware that they might not be perfect in English. They're speaking in their second language, and just be aware of that. Slow down when you speak. Speak clearly. Don't use as many localisms or slang like we do in the touring industry. We call things ridiculous names. So because we understand it between ourselves doesn't mean that somebody from Japan or Germany or Argentina is going to know what we mean. And our job relies on detail. So I can't stress enough, just be clear, slow down, and understand that you're speaking to somebody in their second language, because it's really fucking difficult.
The translators are trying to understand you as well and your slangs. Because, like, example, like I'm from the South, so some sayings that I say, they may not understand what that means. And so you need to put that in perspective, no matter where you're coming from, definitely to slow down and take it one word at a time, because they are doing their best to translate across what you're trying to give out. So
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, MJ.
So doing the thing. So we've talked about all this really serious stuff, and it's serious. You have to have your ducks in a row, you have to plan, but we're also really, really privileged to be paid to travel the world and work directly with citizens of those places that we're in. We're not going in as tourists. We get to see some really cool stuff that if you're just dropping in, you wouldn't get to. So take the time to experience those places and the unique position that we're in to do some really cool stuff. I mean, like, I know personally, a lot of the people that I grew up with probably haven't left the country. And here I am, like, in China, in Shanghai shopping. It's like, that is a privilege. And, do some research and ask your promoter about trips that they can help arrange on a day off in the city you're in for the touring party. People are very proud of their cultures and their cities, and they love to show it off. A little trick I like is, instead of asking my local rep, where should I go? They're looking at it they're trying to look through things through your eye, through your eyes, and second guess what you might like. I say, where would you go? Where would you go to eat? Where would you go to shop? Like, that's my little trick. And I always find like the greatest stuff and get a glimpse into places that a local would like. Do some research, and maybe in your master tour, your day sheet, a list of some things that people can do on their own on their day off if you're not, planning a big trip that people can go on, or if they just choose not to go with the group. Some stuff that they can experience. And we have the privilege too to do some really cool, like, behind the scenes stuff. Like, something we talked about yesterday was, one favorite of like everybody in the touring world is just outside of Brisbane in Australia, which is Lone Pine Koala Sanctuary. And they take care of touring groups. You can just call them up and, say I'm here in town, and they know all the gigs. They'll make sure it's legit. And you can bring your touring group there, and they'll give you a whole guided tour, and they have an impressive array of hundreds and hundreds of photos of rock stars and their crews cuddling a koala. You get to cuddle the koala. I have a picture of myself with this huge eagle on my arm there. We talked yesterday about, doing private tours at the Louvre, skydiving in South Africa. I've gone whale watching in New Zealand. Like, these are just actually normal things we've all done. So take advantage of that.
It's 3 o'clock in the morning to go out and live my dream of going on an African safari, and I was back by 11 o'clock in the morning, and nobody knew I was gone except for the people that came along. And it was one of the most amazing days of my life.
And try all the food.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, like, sometimes I think to myself when I sit back, and especially if you do a show in some weird place, or you're doing like a private or corporate somewhere weird, I'm like, I may realistically never be here in my life again. And it's like, I want to take advantage of that. That is just such a cool thing, so I try never lose sight of that.
Didn't we do remember we were in a sea container in Montevideo in the jungle?
You'll never regret making the most of your time, especially if you have days off to bring your teams around and do fun things in these countries. You'll always look back and be like, I'm really thankful that I took the time to go and do that. And I'll be called Club Griswold all day. I'll be the tour dad nerd that's wrangling the people to go and see the museums. They'll thank you later. A lot of people like to stay in their hotels.
I like to say this job is 75% boredom, 20% mind-blowing stress, and 5% of doing things that people would kill to do. And that's what
20% mind-blowing stress.
Sometimes even
depends on the day. That's a slow day. But,
and a lot of times even stuff that's like touristy stuff is like, you do it. Like go to see like Christ the Redeemer in Rio, it's worth it. It's like, when are you going to get to go there again?
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, that's why we call it doing the thing. Even if it's just, in your hometown or on a local tour, do the thing on days off. But whether it's like some local food that's awesome that you got to try or some museum, but go do the thing, force yourself to get out and get your team out there. It's one of my funnest parts of the job of planning those days off for everybody. Honestly, like it kind of breaks up the monotony of like advancing shows too. I try to advance days off and all the activities as much as a show day sometimes. But
and when you have a local tour manager, it makes it kind of easy to do that.
Right.
Like
and
that becomes your job, is being a tour guide.
Yeah.
We mentioned it yesterday. I don't know if you said it today, that a lot of the times the promoters have like access to all local, give you the VIP treatment, and then just makes a fun day for everybody. You as a tour manager look like you had your
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
Oh, somebody off excursions. Typically that's you. That's on you. But it does.
That's why you're there. That's why you're there.
In a bunch of ways. Sometimes the promoter will organize a thing, and it's going to cost everybody going out to a day at it. And then sometimes the tour might do an activity and guys do it is how you do it.
Sometimes you're like, oh, we should.
All the time,
and a lot of times the artist wants to bring it no matter what level,
It goes half and half. Like when we were the Rings and went to, and the promoter was like, have fun. We'll cover your transport out there, if y'all want to get the tickets, so just don't ever be afraid to just ask and just look at both sides of the fence. Sometimes they'll cover it. Sometimes you just, you take the bill on your own side.
And quite often our local friends are really proud of their local culture. And so they're happy to come along or help organize. It becomes a lovely way to turn your gig into a little bit of a cultural
experience. And a great way to build relationships.
Develop relationships. Exactly. It's a great relationship builder for your crew and also for the people who you're working with in those countries.
I have built some great friendships with people from all around the world on doing those little side excursions.
Yeah.
And also when you return back to that country again, and then you have a story to share with someone, and then it just keeps building, and it's just it's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
We went on a warm and fuzzy.
Henry, may I just say one thing? I was asked last week about U.S. entry passport validity. So I've just sent Henry a link. He'll post it on the site. I can't remember who asked for that, but it's important. I didn't have the answer, and I wanted to give that answer.
I'll put that link up, and then everything else that we covered today is also already on the website. So check out our apps and then the documents that Brandy made for us. Thank you so much. This has been a really fun closing to the International 101 series. So everybody, thank you for sticking around. And well, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
We'll be back Thursday with Judd White and Matt Schneider for Advanced Health.
Oh yeah, that's going to be a good one.
That's going to be good.
I'd also like to add that we went on to Twitter to open up the platform to you guys today. Same handle as our Instagram. So talk to us, tweet away. We've opened that platform to you guys. So we're excited about that. And we'll be posting new things on Twitter as well. So thank you.
Stay safe and healthy, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. Oh, and for all the Jedis out there, may the 4th be with you.
Oh, yeah.
The 4th be with you.
The 4th be with you.